the dark, shimmering lake. They say some places have souls of their own. Places like Lake Crescent, Washington, where the water lies still and black, reflecting the trees and mountains like an endless mirror. I had come here to peel back the layers of its quiet mystery, assigned by my editor to cover The Haunting of Crescent Lodge. It sounded like any other ghost story, but something about this place felt different, unsettling, almost personal. I could feel it pressing down on me as I turned the last curve, and the lodge came into view. The lodge was old, looming against the autumn twilight. A relic from the 1920s, its dark wooden walls seemed to hold secrets in every beam and creak. As I stepped inside, an icy draft greeted me, sweeping the tension up my spine. The receptionist, a young woman with wide eyes that darted nervously around the empty lobby, checked me in quickly, handing me the key with trembling hands. "Room 212, she muttered, barely looking at me. "You're staying the night, then?" "Of course," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Isn't that the idea?" She just nodded, as though there were some unspoken understanding between us. I shrugged it off, lugging my bag down a dimly lit hallway to my room, feeling the silence wrap around me tighter with every step. When I finally reached my room, the door creaked as it opened, releasing a musty smell that made me hesitate. But inside, the room was clean, neat, just wrong somehow. A chill lingered in the air, despite the radiator humming softly by the window. And that's when I saw it. The book. An old diary, placed carefully on the nightstand, leather-bound and worn, with no hint of dust. Someone had been here recently. I opened it, heart pounding, and found the pages filled with thin, scrawling handwriting. The last entry stopped me cold. October 31st, 2012. He's watching. I can feel him, just beyond the shore, waiting. The words seemed to vibrate under my fingers, echoing through my thoughts. Tonight was October 31st, and I was alone here as the light outside the window faded into darkness. I could feel something, an awareness, almost like a breath on the back of my neck, urging me to put the diary down. But I couldn't. I had to know more. And so, with a nervous chuckle to break the tension, I whispered, "All right, Lake Crescent. Show me what you've got. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos, and tell me where you're from in the comments." The next morning dawned with a sky thick and gray, casting a silver light over Lake Crescent. The water lay unnaturally still, almost mirror-like, as if it was waiting, hiding something just below the surface. After a restless night, I decided to shake off my unease and explore the shoreline, my camera in hand, ready to capture anything unusual. It felt ridiculous, but after finding the diary with its ominous entries, the lodge's creaks and groans had kept me awake, whispering of things unseen. As I walked along the narrow trail by the lake, an odd sensation prickled at my skin, a tingling awareness, as though I wasn't alone. I paused and looked around, but the woods were silent. No breeze, no birds, just an oppressive quiet. I forced myself to ignore it and continued on, feeling the weight of the trees pressing in on me, the kind of stillness that presses down on your lungs and leaves no space to breathe. Then, in my peripheral vision, I noticed something on the lake, a faint ripple breaking the smooth surface. Curious, I lifted my camera and zoomed in, focusing on the water. My pulse quickened as I watched the ripple intensify, spreading outward in smooth, calculated waves, too perfect to be random. A shadow formed beneath the surface, deep and dark, shifting like smoke. My fingers tightened on the camera, and I hit record, my heart thudding against my ribs. For a moment I thought I saw a shape, a face maybe, or hands reaching upward, pressing against the surface as if it were glass. But before I could focus, the ripple vanished, leaving nothing but my own blurred reflection in the water. I checked the footage, rewinding and pausing at each frame, but the shadow seemed to slip away, just out of reach, as if it knew I was trying to capture it. A chill crawled down my spine, a reminder of the diary's words. He's watching. I didn't know who he was, but I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to turn back toward the safety of the lodge. But curiosity clawed at me, rooting me to the spot. I whispered, more to myself than to anyone, "Who are you? What are you hiding?" I spent the rest of the morning going through my footage, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen in the lake was just a trick of light, a figment of an overactive imagination. Yet something about it gnawed at me. The strange shadow, the ripples spreading in calculated waves, it felt too intentional, and the words from that diary kept creeping back into my mind. He's watching. It was then that I noticed her, a woman, thin and weathered, sitting in the far corner of the lodge's lounge, her gaze fixed on me. Her clothes were faded and plain, blending almost seamlessly with the dim, outdated decor. Her eyes, however sharp and intense, pierced me from across the room. I tried to ignore her, but there was something unsettling about her presence, something that rooted me to my chair. Eventually, she beckoned me over with a subtle tilt of her head. The urge to stay put was strong, but curiosity won out. As I approached, she fixed her gaze on me, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. "Newcomer," she said, her voice low and gravelly, like the whisper of dry leaves. "You think you're the first to come here looking for him?" I blinked, unsure how to respond. "Him?" I asked cautiously. Her lips twisted into a thin smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "The lake knows, it always knows, and so does he." She leaned closer, her eyes flickering with something between pity and fear. "You've seen the shimmer, haven't you?" The way she said it, the shimmer, it was like she could see right into me, right into the terror that had gripped me as I watched that shadow beneath the water. I nodded, unable to speak. "You need to leave, girl," she whispered urgently, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "You think it's all just a story, but he's real, and he's waiting for you." Her hand reached across the table, clutching mine with an unexpected strength. "Don't go back to the water after dark. That's when he comes." Her grip was ice cold, her fingers trembling, and then, as quickly as she'd grabbed me, she pulled her hand back, almost in horror, muttering, "Too late. It's always too late." I backed away, my heart racing. I wanted to ask more, but she just shook her head, her gaze drifting back to the shadows beyond the lodge windows, as if she already knew what was coming for me. Ignoring the old woman's warnings was a mistake. I knew that, even as I slipped through the creaking door of the lodge and headed back toward the lake under the cover of night. But curiosity has a way of eating at your thoughts, nibbling at reason until nothing remains but a need to see, to know. The moon hung heavy and pale above the trees, casting an eerie glow over the glassy surface of Lake Crescent. I tightened my grip on my flashlight, each step drawing me closer to that dark, whispering water. The silence out here was different from before. Heavier, almost watchful. Every crunch of a twig beneath my feet felt amplified, echoing into the vastness around me. I reached the shoreline, taking a deep breath to steady myself. But the cold, sharp air seemed to cut through my lungs. My fingers hovered over the flashlight switch, heart pounding as I flicked it on and directed the beam toward the lake's surface. At first there was only my own reflection, pale and ghostly in the dark water. But then, as the light traced a path across the lake, something shifted. The water rippled unnaturally, breaking its mirror-like surface, and that familiar unnatural shadow emerged from below, slowly darkening, swirling in an odd mesmerizing pattern just beyond the reach of the light. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow grew denser, its edges sharpening, almost forming into limbs. They looked like arms, twisting, stretching toward the surface, reaching up as though clawing their way out of something unseen. Panic gripped me, but I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the earth as if the ground itself was rooting me there. And then I saw it. A face, faint but unmistakable, pressing just below the surface, its eyes open and staring right into mine. They were dark, empty, devoid of life, but filled with a strange, insidious longing. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my hand and landing in the mud with a muffled thud. The light spun, casting erratic beams across the trees and back onto the water. But the face was gone, replaced by an expanse of undisturbed lake, as if nothing had ever happened. I backed away, my mind reeling, heartbeat hammering as I scrambled for my flashlight. The water returned to its stillness, but I felt it, an unseen presence, lingering just below, waiting patiently for the moment I'd make the mistake of coming too close. The next morning, something felt wrong. My head throbbed with a dull ache, like I'd been swimming too deep underwater, and a cold, gritty feeling clung to my skin. I sat up slowly, blinking at the morning light streaming through the window, trying to shake off the fogginess. My first instinct was to check my phone, but when I reached for it on the nightstand, I froze. The screen showed an impossible date. October 31st, 2012. My heart skipped. I fumbled with the settings, but every screen insisted the same thing. I tried to recall last night, searching for something to explain this, but all I remembered was the face in the water, the shadow reaching for me, the numbness in my limbs as I scrambled back to the lodge. Yet somehow, I was here, in my bed, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Shaken, I threw on my coat and rushed to the lobby, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain this strange morning. The receptionist from yesterday was gone, replaced by a man with a blank expression who barely glanced up as I approached. "Excuse me," I began, my voice shaky. "Do you know what happened to the woman working last night?" He looked up, his face clouded with confusion. "Miss, no woman's worked the desk here since, well, years. Are you feeling all right?" I tried to explain, but the words died on my tongue. As he looked at me, something dark and unspoken passed between us, a knowledge he seemed too frightened to share. I felt a coldness creeping in, not from outside, but from something lodged deep within me, a sense of dread spreading like frost. Back in my room, desperate for answers, I picked up the diary I'd found on my first night. Flipping through the pages, my fingers stopped at an entry that made my skin crawl. October 31st, 2012. He reached for me tonight, just beyond the shore. I thought I could escape, but he's patient. They always come back. The date struck me like a blow. Was this me? Or was it Sarah, the woman who'd vanished a decade ago? My hands shook, and as I flipped to the last page, I found an entry I couldn't remember writing. Yet the handwriting was unmistakably mine. October 31st, 2024. He's waiting for me in the water. We share the same story now. A chill ran through me, and I felt his presence lurking somewhere outside, his patience endless, knowing that sooner or later I'd return to the lake. The weight of the diary's words lingered as I sat alone in my room, the silence thick and oppressive. I kept flipping through the pages, each entry a whisper of dread, of a life slipping further into the grip of something dark and unseen. Every line felt like a warning, yet my curiosity, the same stubborn need to understand that brought me here in the first place, pushed me forward. Somewhere, beneath all the fear, I had this burning question: why me? As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lake outside my window, I made a decision. I needed to understand the full story of Sarah, the woman who'd vanished in 2012. I rummaged through the small lodge library, pulling dusty records and faded guest logs. The staff seemed to avoid my gaze, as if sensing the desperation in my movements, or perhaps because they too feared the truth. Finally, buried in a stack of forgotten files, I found a folder labeled Sarah Langley. My fingers trembled as I opened it, revealing a few brittle pages, incident reports, strange police sketches of Lake Crescent's shoreline, and scrawled notes from old staff members. She'd stayed in room 212, my room, and her last sighting, October 31st, 2012. The same night described in her diary, the same night I seemed caught in now. One note, barely legible, caught my attention. Sarah became obsessed with the lake. It read. She spoke of a shadow, of a figure who called to her, said he was waiting for her, just below the surface. She'd walk down to the shore every night, like she was in a trance. I shoved the papers back, heart pounding, and glanced out the window. The lake was still, darkening in the evening light, an inky mirror stretching endlessly, holding its secrets just out of reach. I couldn't escape the feeling that Sarah was out there, waiting for me, or that maybe I was her, trapped in some twisted loop of time. The final page of the diary whispered to me again. He's waiting for me in the water. We shared the same story now. I knew I had to go back to the lake. Whatever fate had befallen Sarah, I felt it pulling at me, a string tugging my very soul toward the water's edge. A part of me knew it was a terrible mistake, but another part, darker and bolder, couldn't resist. I grabbed the diary, slipping it into my pocket. "All right, Sarah," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Let's end this." The sky was heavy with clouds as I walked down the path to the lake, the air thick and damp, clinging to my skin like an omen. Each step felt both inevitable and horribly wrong, yet I couldn't stop. My flashlight flickered as I neared the shoreline, casting jittery beams across the water, which lay silent, vast, and black. Somewhere beneath its depths, he was waiting. I could feel it like a pull in my chest, a deep, thrumming need to understand what Sarah had found here, and what was waiting for me. The moment my foot touched the muddy edge of the lake, the air shifted, tightening with a sinister energy. I raised my flashlight, its faint beam catching the surface of the water, and watched as the familiar ripples spread out from the center, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. The water shimmered with an unnatural glow, as if beckoning me closer. I knelt down, feeling compelled to lean in, as though some invisible force was urging me forward. My reflection stared back at me, but something was off. The eyes in the water seemed darker, emptier, and then behind my reflection, a shadow materialized, rising up from the depths, taking on the shape of a figure with hollow, unblinking eyes. My heart pounded, each beat echoing through my ears like a drum, but I couldn't move. The shadow grew closer, reaching out with arms that seemed to stretch endlessly, fingers curling just below the surface, inches from my face. I tried to pull back, but my body was locked in place, my hands rooted in the mud as though they were being pulled into the earth itself. In the dim light, I saw his face, pale, empty, and utterly devoid of life. His lips moved, forming words that seemed to echo in my mind rather than my ears. You came back. They always come back. A chill gripped me, and I felt my body leaning forward, drawn toward the water. Just as my fingers broke the surface, icy hands shot up, grabbing my wrists with a vice-like grip, yanking me downward. My scream was swallowed by the lake as I plunged into the frigid darkness, the water filling my lungs, blurring my vision. Shadows swirled around me, faces like Sarah's, blank and hollow, reaching for me, their silent mouths open in an eternal scream. And then, with a flash of clarity, I realized the truth. They weren't reaching out to pull me down. They were trying to push me back, to save me. But it was too late. The lake had claimed me. I awoke to the soft murmur of voices and the scent of damp earth, my senses drifting back reluctantly, as if they were tethered to something far beneath me. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, like lead, but I forced them open to find myself lying on the shore of Lake Crescent, the water's edge just inches from my feet. Pale morning light filtered through the trees, casting an eerie calm over the lake. For a moment I convinced myself it had all been a terrible dream, but then I looked down at my hands, caked in dark, silty mud, my wrists bruised and raw where those icy fingers had gripped me. I sat up slowly, my mind reeling, trying to piece together what had happened. Had I imagined it all? The shadows, the faces, the feeling of being dragged down into the depths. But then I saw it, sitting beside me on the shore, soaked and tattered, the diary. Its pages were swollen from water, the ink blurred and smeared, but one page remained legible. My heart raced as I read the words that appeared in my own handwriting, words I didn't remember writing. October 31st, 2024. They let me go, but I am no longer alone. I am his now. I belong to the lake. A chill washed over me, deeper than any I'd felt before, settling into my bones. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the diary to my chest as I backed away from the water. I could feel something in me had changed, as though a piece of me still lingered in that dark, silent place beneath the lake's surface. Stumbling back to the lodge, I found the lobby empty and unnaturally quiet. No staff, no guests, just the same heavy silence that had blanketed the lake that morning. But then, in the corner of the room, a figure caught my eye. Evelyn, the old woman who had warned me, was sitting in the same spot, her eyes dark and knowing. She smiled faintly, nodding as though she understood exactly what I had seen. "You went down, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice a soft, haunting echo. "Now you're part of him. The lake has taken its claim." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, a sense of resignation settled over me, a feeling of belonging to something vast and eternal. I turned to leave, glancing back one last time at Evelyn, who nodded approvingly. As I walked out of the lodge, I could feel it, the lake's presence, its hold over me, stretching with each step, tethering me to its dark depths, patiently waiting. And I knew that someday, perhaps on another October night, I would return. The lake never lets you go. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. And tell me where you from in the comments.